work, I guess.
That's great. And Dave, I know you've heard it before. So Dan, for your benefit, I might just go through kind of a 2 minute spiel of Paramount, how we got started, and then that'll get us up to date. And we can, happy to answer any questions about how this year's going and what we're looking for. But
Yeah.
Paramount started in 2015. It was started by two guys, Brian Barrow and Joel Waxman, one with a credit background, one with a real estate development background. And they came together. Brian had the thesis that, he was a build-to-suit developer, and his thesis was that pref equity for this space was overpriced, given having a signed lease, clean environmental, just a lot of things buttoned up for a deal. And so what he wanted to try and accomplish was build a platform that could do a blended cost of capital all the way up the stack that was more effective and more efficient than going out every deal and sourcing a senior with some pref equity. And really where you can differentiate yourself in that thesis is that the platform that he wanted to create didn't necessarily take a profits interest, whereas pref equity, as you all know, typically can be anywhere from 20 to 50% of the profits. And so in 2015, the fourth quarter, we had a developer friend out of Dallas who was doing Dollar Generals and Caliber Collisions, and we put the platform to the test, and we ended up doing about $25 million worth of their deals. Very simple, single tenant, build a suit, retail deals. I guess the key differentiator in those two types of deals that year was that Dollar General is obviously investment grade. Everybody knows who they are, type tenant. Caliber Collision is private and largely funded by private equity. So we're able to dive into two different types of credit profiles, so to speak. And it was, all intents and purposes, it was very successful. At that time, it was all kind of high net worth individuals that were helping capitalize those deals. Because of the success, we're able to take the platform and roll it into more of an institutional capital partner in the following year. In 2016, really expanded it out, still doing retail, but looking at office, industrial, medical, and then your government type work, whether it be GSA work to state level or county level work as well. We ended up doing $75 million that year. And since then, it's just progressed. Last year we ended the year with $240 million out. From that time, that institutional capital partner has moved other directions with, it was a hedge fund, so they've moved in other directions, and we've backfilled that with Guggenheim Investment Partners out of New York. We started with them, in 21? So we started with them in 19 with a revolving commitment, and then just last year restructured that commitment to now it's a revolving $250 million. And so, we've got $60 to $70 million out at any given time. And in the net lease space, we're averaging about 13 months from closing to disposition. So as you can imagine, that money cycles through relatively quick. And so we're constantly out in the market trying to find new deals. As you can imagine, Guggenheim likes their money working and not just sitting in a bucket. So, so we've been effective. We were fortunate that as we moved into 2020, that we had started to really concentrate. And I say fortunate, I don't know that this was any hindsight. It was just the nature of who was scaling at the time. As we looked at our portfolio, that a lot of our concentration was already in C-stores, automotive space, the QSR space, with very limited, we had very limited exposure to any of the tenant types who were seeing problems as it related to not being an essential business. And so we were fortunate there, and we continue to look at those industries and those credit types as groups that can do some meaningful scale right now. To add to that, so that's kind of the premise of how we started and where where we've come. The other side of that too is what we do internally, right? So it's a straight debt platform. It's a lending platform. The whole idea is to get as high in the capital stack as we possibly can. So pre-COVID, we were finding ourselves potentially at 100% LTC on some of these development deals. As COVID hit, we brought it down to 95. It's really more about protecting our position in the value proposition, right? But lately we've been getting back up to 100% in some instances. So we're finding our way back to that space. It's really governed by the LTV. So it's usually going to read the lesser of 95% LTC or 80% LTV. We go out and we'll get an appraisal, and that appraisal will be on the potential, the stabilized value. Let's use a 7-Eleven, for instance. We'll get the appraisal on that stabilized value, and that's what will govern our attachment point. And so so my role in all of this is to go out and find and create relationships with different developers and different debt and equity shops out in the market so that we can find new opportunities to really dive into. And I've been doing it now going on 4 years. And so I'd like to think that we've been able to create some meaningful relationships out in the market, both with developers and with what I believe to be sophisticated debt and equity shops. And so when I look at it from a debt and equity perspective, ultimately my role is to figure out how I can add value to y'all's conversations as you're out in the market. And a lot of that can be one, just knowing who we are. And if you come across a deal, it's worth a conversation, to being an extension of you in a conversation, whether it be on the phone, a Zoom call, hopefully one day in person, where we're able to, I'm able to get there and just meet, have lunch or do dinner or something like that. But it's always going to be an extension of y'all in how we can add value to that developer's development opportunity. It's usually 2 different developers that we're working with. One is what we would call a preferred developer, who's got a great relationship with the 7-Eleven and is, they've pitched to him anywhere from, let's call it a handful to 2 handfuls of developments over 12, 24, 36 months. In those instances, we really like to understand the developer, the experience, and try to figure out a program that can fit around all of those developments. So if it's 5 developments a year, we want to figure out a program and price it, in a way that that developer feels good about doing all 5 of those deals with us, and he can do it's a program. We create a program, he understands it, or they understand it, and they can always, they can price their deals when talking to the tenant around it, and they know that the capital is going to be there. The other type of tenant we see, the other type of developer we see is what I'll call a regional developer. They understand the cities or the locations that they're developing better than anybody, so they have line of sight to land opportunities before anybody else, and they're able to tie them up, and then the tenant comes to them. So maybe you've got a guy who ties up 8 acres and can carve out 6 pad sites, and in the time that they're doing the diligence on the land, they're able to tie up, a couple leases or all of the leases, and it's ready to go. And it's not the same. It's different. It's different industries. It's different clients. It's different tenants. But the way I would look at that is, okay, you've got 8 acres. You've got 6 pads. You've tied it all up. Here's the value and all of that, and here's how high we can get up in being able to help you effectuate that. Or maybe they just tie up 1 acre, right? And it doesn't have to be 8. It can be 1 acre, and they're able to go and find the tenant and get it done. But ultimately, we're always going to be looking for that executed lease. We're going to do internal credit work on the tenant. So if you think of it that way, if it's a Starbucks, that's easy. Yeah. If it's a Dutch Brothers, we've got to do we got to do a little bit more work because it's private equity, and yes, they're scaling, but how do we feel? How do we all feel about their expectation of value in the secondary market? And we just want to get comfortable there. All of our underwriting is done, yet it's done to protect our downside, but it's also done in a way that, there's no hiccups in the business model. And so if 99% of the folks we deal with, they're moving towards a disposition, and we want to make sure that there are no hiccups along the way. So we're going to pay special attention to the lease, the credit of the tenant, the environmental, make sure all the surveys and title and everything is clean, and so that as they give them the pathway to go build it and then get it out of their hands, right? We do all of that internally. We have a senior paralegal. We have a senior manager who oversees all of our loan closings, and she has her own team that's inclusive of the paralegal, but also a junior closer. We have a legal team that we've worked with on all of our loans since inception. Very transactional, and understand that we're trying to do our best to keep legal costs down. And they understand it, again, from the programmatic side. The good thing is we try to do the loan docs one time, and then they just continue to cycle through. So each time it should get more efficient. And then once we get a loan closed, the senior loan manager is the interface between us and the developer. We have a group named Essex who helps us corral the invoices and everything for the draws. And then they hire the site inspectors for us. But it all looks very similar to what a developer would be used to, in that they submit a draw request and it gets funneled to them accordingly. I would say the big difference between us and probably what they've been used to in the past, which is typically a bank, is that we're not going to be as rigid. The lady who handles all of our loans is somebody that all of our developers have become very close with, and they're close with her because they recognize that she's there to work with them, right? And so not everything is going to be black and white. Sometimes you got to have some fluidity in how all this works. So we do all that internally.
Let me jump in. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So walk us through. So if we come in and bring a deal to you, what are you specifically looking for? Does it have to be a 7-Eleven or a major credit tenant? Does it have to be a Dollar General? Could it be just sort of, I guess, profile wise, what are you looking for? And then how should we be underwriting or preparing something to bring to you?
Yeah, so we've worked with a variety of credit profiles. So I think when you're thinking about it out in the market, the investment grade credit profiles are going to be easy for us to underwrite, and likely we've already underwritten them. So if you hear about it, those are deals that you can bring to us and just say, hey, maybe we have a build-a-suit 7-Eleven, or a build-a-suit racetrack, or a build-a-suit Chick-fil-A. Are y'all can y'all do that? The answer is going to be yes. So then in those scenarios, the next question will be, what's the developer experience, right? Are they experienced? Do they have the ability to effectuate that business model for Chick-fil-A or 7-Eleven or whoever it is? And that part will remain consistent, right? We're always going to want to make sure the developer's got the aptitude to be able to figure it out. Yeah. Then when you look at the credit profile, so then I also mentioned Dutch Brothers, right? We've done a few Dutch Brothers, and they're a private credit, and they're private equity backed, and we're able to dive into those and get comfortable there too. I would say that as you're looking at what we would consider these non-public entities, private credits, some of them which are in growth mode, the key attributes there are going to be kind of where are they in growth mode, right? If it's a group, if it's a brand new concept and they're at 20 units, it might be hard for us to wrap our heads around that. But we got to understand the color, right? I'm not saying don't bring it to us. We just got to understand the color and what that looks like. But in those scenarios, the private type credits that have the smaller unit prototypes, you're probably going to want to have some 50 unit or more type operations, just so everybody can get comfortable. And that probably applies to, as you break it down into the QSR world, especially the franchisee side of the business. if it's the Burger King operator, for instance, in Arizona. Well, from my understanding, in a lot of these instances, Phoenix is going to have one operator that's got the whole territory. Likely, we're going to be comfortable with those guys because not only do they have the whole territory, but that probably consists of a lot of units and some historicals on the operations or the financials. But I I would tell you in all those instances, if you're seeing these deals with developers and they're wanting you to source debt and equity for it, those are types of deals where if you send it our way, we're going to want to be able to give you a quick yes or no, right? The investment grades, we can give you a quick yes or no, or no, but usually it's going to be yes. If it's the franchisee type credit or the growth type brands, then what I'll do is sit down with Pete internally, who's the head of our credit department, and say, here's what we've got, here's what we know. Is this something that we can wrap our head around? And generally the answer is going to be no, we're just not, we're bearish on this space and we're not going to be in it. Or yes, but we're going to need to do a little bit deeper dive into what those financials look like. And then where that would lead to is, can we get, some additional financial history that we can look at internally, right? Usually that's going to consist of, let's call it 3 years if they have it, of operating financials, so we can see what the P&Ls look like and we can see what the trends look like.
So is it all non-recourse debt? And then what's your cost of capital, generally speaking, for somebody coming in?
So we do a repayment completion guarantee with our developers. And typically that burns off when they deliver the product to the tenant and the tenant starts paying rent. So a good example of that is if somebody was building for a Starbucks, they'd likely take them 90 to 120 days. They'd deliver the building to Starbucks. Starbucks would have probably another 90 days to do their work internal, and they'd open and start paying rent, in which case we'd burn off our completion guarantee. The reason we do that is because we get so high in the capital stack. If, pre-COVID, even now at 95 to 100%, that's our way to align ourselves with the developers, just to say, hey, we're giving you all this money and we're going to keep this in place. So you do what you say you're going to do. And then what you do, we'll look at the credit of the lease, right? That's where we'll move our concentration to, and we'll burn off the contingencies. The only thing that stays in place after that are the bad boy carve outs, and that'll stay in place just to make sure that we get everything done. And then, so, the pricing levers, there's a couple of them. You've got, the origination fee is always going to be 1%. We've never really come off that, and it'll typically stay that way. Okay. And you've got the interest rate, right? And the interest rate, I think, what I'll tell you is it can hover anywhere between 10 to 12%. Okay, and that's on the drawn amount. So your effective rate varies throughout the loan depending on your draw schedule and how much money you have out. But let's call it a 10 to 12% on the drawn amount. And then there's an exit fee, which can step up. And I say that in the sense that it really depends on what the developer tells us their business model is going to look like, right? So if you tell us that you think you need 15 months, and there's a possibility that maybe you sell it in 12, right? Maybe you get it up and you're sold in 12. We're going to look at that and say, okay, well, there's two components to it. One, if we can effectuate your business model in that time period, maybe we don't put an exit fee on the first 12 months, right? Okay. If we get out past 12 months, then maybe we need, is there a problem and do we need a price for being in it still? Yeah. So maybe we say, months 13 and 14, there's a 1% exit fee. And if we get through 13 and 14 and we still haven't sold it, now what's happening, and we need a price for that, and maybe it's 2% in month 15. So it's a moving target based off what the business model that we're being told is, right? What we want to do is we want to build something around the developer that helps him effectuate his business model and does it in a way that he's rewarded if he does, and we're protected if for any reason it keeps pushing out. And the other part of that is the minimum multiple. So we don't do prepayment penalties we do the minimum multiple or minimum yield, and it's ultimately there to protect against a shorter turnaround, right? So generally that minimum multiple runs out somewhere between month 10 and month 12, but it's there to protect inside of that. So if for some reason you get out of it in 6 months, well, we've committed to all that money, so we got to protect it. We got to protect our returns for our investors, and so that's ultimately what that is. So those are all the levers that we can pull, and those levers are pulled for a variety of reasons. One, if y'all are telling us it's an experienced developer, they're going to have a lot of deals with this one tenant. Well, let's figure out where we are comfortable on the pricing of it, and let's pull some of those so that we can set it in place and go. If you're saying that, it's the other side, it's the regional developer that's going to have a lot of deals, a variety of tenants, similar in nature, we want to make sure that we're pricing in a way that is effective to create that program that we can keep doing deal after deal after deal.
That's great. And I've got a hard stop at 2, so I apologize.
No worries.
So deal comes in, we get you the credit profile. You look at it, say yay or nay. You price it accordingly. And what's realistic with respect to close for something soup to nuts? Is that 30 days, 45 days?
The first deal, we're going to want to have 45 days. Right. And a lot of that has to deal with the new process, right? We want to give everybody enough time with the loan docs. We want to give everybody enough time with the diligence. If it's buttoned up, then maybe we can close it within that 45 days, but let's go ahead and say 45 days. From that point moving forward, we'd like to have 30 days, but we've closed a deal in 7 days for a guy that we've done a lot of business for. So a lot of it's going to depend on how buttoned up everything is with the developer. How we generally will send a Dropbox out right when we're starting to go and have them fill it with everything that they have. And then everybody internally starts doing the review. We do a kickoff call, and then we stay in touch on a weekly basis leading up into the close, whatever that date is that's identified. So it's for the most part, we've never missed a date that we've targeted. If we have had to push a date, it's because something came up that we found in diligence, right? It's because maybe somebody's environmental was too old, right? It's 3 years old and it needs to be redone. And so that's the other side of it is we want to uncover everything that we can early on so that we can already be prepped for that, right? So we'll ask, as we're looking at the credit, the real estate economics, we'll want to make sure do they already have the environmental done? Are there certain things that we need to be looking out for? And, a clean environmental is nice and it's great to have. Sometimes it's not always the case, and we need to figure out what the remediation plan is, right? So those are some things that we've worked through, and we can box those things in and still feel good about the deal. Alternatively, building permits are another thing that people are concerned about right now. And so we've been doing post-closing building permits. We do it up to 90 days. I've seen it forgiven up to 120 days. But we want to have an idea of what that, how that's progressing as well.
I was going to say, so last question, how far does somebody need to be along in the, I guess, entitlement do they have to have permits to close? I guess 2 questions. Where do they have to be for you to say, okay, we'll close with that? And then will you fund all the costs that are involved in it?
So as it relates to how far along they need to be, so we will need to have entitlements in place. And when I say entitlements, I'm talking about entitlements, anything that could derail the deal completely.
Yeah.
Those need to be cured. They need to be satisfied, and it needs to, the zoning needs to be in place. If there's a CUP or anything that needs to be, that they need to get, I look at those two different ways. If it's a CUP that if they don't get it, the deal's dead, then that'll need to be in place before we close. If it's a CUP that, in the instance of 7-Eleven, where they're trying to get a beer and wine permit and they're simply saying, if we get it, our lease is now this price. If we don't get it, we're still going in. Our lease is going to be a different price. That's a little bit different. That can be a post-closing item that we can look at. Same with site plan approval. Site plan approval is already in the process, and maybe, whatever the agency or the committee is still ruffling with a few things here and there, but it's going to get, they're going to get it approved, but they might need you to move this shrub over, a couple inches or whatever it may be. That's okay as well. It's really the thing. It's got to be entitled. It's got to be zoned. And what we can't have is anything that'll just completely derail the deal. And building permits, like I said, those can be post-closing. We're going to want to know and just stay and make sure there's constant communication as how that's progressing. If it's past 120 days, then again, we have to box it in. And what we ultimately do is ask for basically half cash pay on the interest. And the reason for that is because once you get past that, to our capital partners, it starts looking a little bit like a land loan, because it's pretty, that means pretty far out. So it's not something that we like to do, because it feels better to have it progressing nicely. But if for some reason there is that potential, and maybe it's not 120 days, and it's 160 days, then that's what we'll just ask the developer to have cash pay that additional time period.
So,
yes.
yeah, no. I think that's probably good. And I wish we could stay on with you longer. In fact, we probably will wrap back up with you at some point here.
Yeah. You feel free to call me. I'm happy to go through this if you have additional questions and follow-up.
Yeah. Well, hey, Matt, thank you so much. We will definitely be calling you because we have some stuff to talk about. So.
Okay. I'll look forward to it. Thanks, fellas.
Yeah. Thanks.